The genocide of Serbs in the independent state of Croatia, Serbo-Croatian. Genocide nad Srbima u nezavisnoj državi was the systematic persecution and extermination of Serbs committed during World War II by the fascist Ustaše regime in the Nazi German puppet state, known as the Independent State of Croatia, Serbo-Croatian. Nezavisna država Hrvatska / NJZVSN država KRVATSKA NDH between 1941 and 1945. It was carried out through executions in death camps, as well as through mass murder, ethnic cleansing, deportations, forced conversions, and war rape. This genocide was simultaneously carried out with the Holocaust in the NDH as well as the genocide of Roma, by combining Nazi racial policies with the ultimate goal of creating an ethnically pure Greater Croatia. The ideological foundation of the Ustaše movement reaches back to the 19th century. Several Croatian nationalists and intellectuals established theories about Serbs as an inferior race. The World War I legacy, as well as the opposition of a group of nationalists to the unification into a common state of South Slavs, influenced ethnic tensions in the newly formed Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, since 1929 Kingdom of Yugoslavia. The 6 January dictatorship and the later anti-Croat policies of the Serb-dominated Yugoslav government in the 1920s and 1930s fueled the rise of nationalist and far-right movements. This culminated in the rise of the Ustaše, an ultranationalist, terrorist organization founded by Ante Pavelić. The movement was financially and ideologically supported by Benito Mussolini, and it was also involved in the assassination of King Alexander I. Following the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia in April 1941, a German puppet state known as the Independent State of Croatia, NDH, was established, comprising most of modern-day Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as parts of modern-day Serbia and Slovenia, ruled by the Ustaše. The Ustaše's goal was to create an ethnically homogeneous Greater Croatia by eliminating all non-Croats, with the Serbs being the primary target, but Jews, Roma, and political dissidents were also targeted for elimination. Large-scale massacres were committed, and concentration camps were built. The largest one was the Jasenovac, which was notorious for its high mortality rate and the barbaric practices which occurred in it. Furthermore, the NDH was the only Axis puppet state to establish concentration camps specifically for children. The regime systematically murdered approximately 200,000 to 500,000 Serbs. 300,000 Serbs were further expelled, and at least 200,000 more Serbs were forcibly converted, most of whom deconverted following the war. Proportional to the population, the NDH was one of the most lethal European regimes. Mile Budek and other NDH high officials were tried and convicted of war crimes by the communist authorities. Concentration camp commandants such as Ljubo Miloš and Miroslav Filipović were captured and executed, while Aloysius Stepanak was found guilty of forced conversion. Many others escaped, including the supreme leader Ante Pavelić, most to Latin America. The genocide was not properly examined in the aftermath of the war, because the post-war Yugoslav government did not encourage independent scholars out of concern that ethnic tensions would destabilize the new communist regime. Nowadays, on 22 April, Serbia marks the public holiday dedicated to the victims of genocide and fascism, while Croatia holds an official commemoration at the Jasenovac Memorial Site. Historical background. The ideological foundation of the Ustaše movement reaches back to the 19th century when Ante Starčević established the Party of Rights, 11, as well as when Josip Frank seceded his extreme fraction from it and formed his own pure Party of Rights, 12. Starčević was a major ideological influence on the Croatian nationalism of the Ustaše, 1314. He was an advocate of Croatian unity and independence, and was both anti-Habsburg. As Starčević saw the main Croatian enemy in the Habsburg monarchy, an anti-Serb, 13, He envisioned the creation of a greater Croatia that would include territories inhabited by Bosniaks, Serbs, and Slovenes, considering Bosniaks and Serbs to be Croats who had been converted to Islam and Eastern Orthodox Christianity. 13. In his demonization of the Serbs, he claimed, how the Serbs today are dangerous for their ideas and their racial composition, how a bent for conspiracies, revolutions, and coups is in their blood. Starčević called the Serbs an unclean race, a nomadic people, and a race of slaves, the most loathsome beasts, while the co-founder of his party, Eugen Kvaternik, denied the existence of Serbs in Croatia, seeing their political consciousness as a threat. 1617-1819, Milovan Delas cites Starčević as the father of racism and ideological father of the Ustaše. While some Ustaše ideologues have linked Starčević's racial ideas to Adolf Hitler's racial ideology, 2021, Frank's party embraced Starčević's position that Serbs were an obstacle to Croatian political and territorial ambitions, and the aggressive anti-Serb attitudes became one of the main characteristics of the party. 22-23-1924. The followers of the ultranationalist Pure Party of Right were known as the Frankists, Frankovci, and they would become the main pool of members of the subsequent Ustaše movement. 25-17-1924. Following the defeat of the Central Powers in World War I and the collapse of Austria-Hungarian Empire, the Provisional State was formed on the southern territories of the empire, which joined the Allies' associate kingdom of Serbia to form the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later known as Yugoslavia, ruled by the Serbian Karađorđević dynasty. Historian John Paul Newman explained that the influence of the Frankists, as well as the legacy of World War I, had an impact on the Ustaše ideology and their future genocidal means. 24-26. Many war veterans had fought at various ranks and on various fronts on both the victorious and defeated sides of the war. 24. Serbia suffered the biggest casualty rate in the world. While Croats fought in the Austro-Hungarian army, and two of them served as military governors of Bosnia and occupied Serbia. 27-26. They both endorsed Austria, Hungary's denationalizing plans in Serb-populated lands, and supported the idea of incorporating a tamed Serbia into the empire. 26. Newman stated that Austro-Hungarian officers' unfaltering opposition to Yugoslavia provided a blueprint for the Croatian radical right. The Ustaše. 26. The Frankists blamed Serbian nationalists for the defeat of Austria-Hungary and opposed the creation of Yugoslavia, which was identified by them as a cover for Greater Serbia. 24. MASS Croatian national consciousness appeared after the establishment of a common state of South Slavs, and it was directed against the new kingdom, more precisely against Serbian predominance within it. 28. Early 20th century Croatian intellectuals Ivo Pilar, Ciro Truhelka, and Milan Šuffle influenced the Ustaše concept of nation and racial identity, as well as the theory of Serbs as an inferior race. 29-30-31. Pilar, historian, politician, and lawyer, placed great emphasis on racial determinism, arguing that Croats had been defined by the Nordicarian racial and cultural heritage, while Serbs had interbred with the Balkan Romanic Vlachs. 32. Truhelka, archaeologist and historian, claimed that Bosnian Muslims were ethnic Croats, who, according to him, belonged to the racially superior Nordic race. On the other hand, Serbs belonged to the degenerate race of the Vlachs. 33-30. The Ustaše promoted the theories of historian and politician Šuffle, who is believed to have claimed that Croatia had been one of the strongest ramparts of Western civilization for many centuries, which he claimed had been lost through its union with Serbia when the nation of Yugoslavia was formed in 1918. 34. The outburst of Croatian nationalism after 1918 was one of the main threats for Yugoslavia's stability. 28. During the 1920s, Ante Pavlic, lawyer, politician, and one of the Frankists, emerged as a leading spokesman for Croatian independence. 19. In 1927, he secretly contacted Benito Mussolini, dictator of Italy and founder of fascism, and presented his separatist ideas to him. 35. Pavlik proposed an independent Greater Croatia that should cover the entire historical and ethnic area of the Croats. 35. In that period, Mussolini was interested in Balkans with the aim of isolating Yugoslavia by strengthening Italian influence on the east coast of the Adriatic. British historian Rory Yeomans claims that there are indications that Pavlik had been considering the formation of some kind of nationalist insurgency group as early as 1928. 37. Anti-Pavlik, one of the Frankists and the leading spokesman for Croatian independence in interwar Yugoslavia, founded the Ustaše movement. In June 1928, Stjepan Radic, the leader of the largest and most popular Croatian party, Croatian Peasant Party, Hrvatska Seljačka Stranka, HSS, was mortally wounded in the parliamentary chamber by Puniša Račić, a Montenegrin Serb leader, former Chetnik member and deputy of the ruling Serb People's Radical Party. Račić also shot 2 other HSS deputies dead and wounded 2 more, 38-24-39-40. The killings provoked violent student protests in Zagreb. 38, trying to suppress the conflict between Croatian and Serbian political parties. King Alexander I proclaimed a dictatorship with the aim of establishing the integral Yugoslavism and a single Yugoslav nation. 41-25-42-43. The introduction of the royal dictatorship brought separatist forces to the fore, especially among the Croats and Macedonians. 44-20, the Ustaše, Croatian Revolutionary Movement, Croatian. Ustaše, a Hrvatski revolutionarni pokret, emerged as the most extreme movement of these. 45. The Ustaše was created in late 1929 or early 1930 among radical and militant student and youth groups, which existed from the late 1920s. 38. Precisely. The movement was founded by journalist Gustav Perček and Anti-Pavlik. 38. They were driven by a deep hatred of Serbs and Serbdom and claimed that Croats and Serbs were separated by an unbridgeable cultural gulf, which prevented them from ever living alongside each other. 34. Pavlik accused the Belgrade government of propagating a barbarian culture and gypsy civilization, claiming they were spreading atheism and bestial mentality in divine Croatia. 46. Supporters of the Ustaše planned genocide years before World War II. For example, one of Pavlik's main ideologues, Mijo Babic, wrote in 1932 that the Ustaše will cleanse and cut whatever is rotten from the healthy body of the Croatian people. 47. In 1933, the Ustaše presented the 17 principles that formed the official ideology of the movement. The principles stated the uniqueness of the Croatian nation, promoted collective rights over individual rights, and declared that people who were not Croat by blood would be excluded from political life. 48-49. In order to explain what they saw as a terror machine, and regularly referred to as some excesses by individuals, the Ustaše cited, among other things, policies of the interwar Yugoslav government which they described as Serbian hegemony that cost the lives of thousands Croats. 50. Historian Jozo Tomasevich explains that argument is not true, claiming that between December 1918 and April 1940, about 280 Croats were killed for political reasons, and that no specific motive for the killings could be identified, as they may also be linked to clashes during the agrarian reform. 51. Moreover, he stated that Serbs too were denied civil and political rights during the royal dictatorship. 40. However, Tomasevich explains that the anti-Croatian policies of the Serbian-dominated Yugoslav government in the 1920s and 1930s, as well as the shooting of the HSS deputies by Radic, were largely responsible for the creation, growth, and nature of Croatian nationalist forces. 40. This culminated in the Ustaše movement, and ultimately its anti-Serbian policies in World War II, which was totally out of proportions to earlier anti-Croatian measures. In Nature and Extent, 40, Yeomans explains that Ustaše officials constantly emphasized crimes against Croats by the Yugoslav government and security forces, although many of them were imagined, though some of them real, as justification for their envisioned eradication of the Serbs. 52. Political scientist Tamara Pavisovic-Trost, commenting on historiography and textbooks, listed the claims that terror against Serbs arose as a result of their previous hegemony, as an example of the relativization of Ustaše crimes. 53. Historian Aristotle Kallis explained that anti-Serb prejudices were a chimera, which emerged through living together in Yugoslavia with continuity with previous stereotypes. 25. The Ustaše functioned as a terrorist organization as well. 54. The first Ustaše Center was established in Vienna, where brisk anti-Yugoslav propaganda soon developed and agents were prepared for terrorist actions. 55. They organized the so-called Velebit uprising in 1932, assaulting a police station in the village of Brušani in Lika. 56. In 1934, the Ustaše cooperated with Bulgarian, Hungarian and Italian right-wing extremists to assassinate King Alexander while he visited the French city of Marseille. 45. Pavlik's fascist tendencies were apparent. 19. The Ustaše movement was financially and ideologically supported by Benito Mussolini. 57. During the intensification of ties with Nazi Germany in the 1930s, Pavlik's concept of the Croatian nation became increasingly race-oriented. 46-58-59. Independent State of Croatia. Kingdom of Yugoslavia's ethnic map 1940. Serbs including Montenegrin Serbs, Croats, Bosnian Muslims, Germans Danube Swabians. Occupation and partition of Yugoslavia after the Axis invasion. In April 1941, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers. After Nazi forces entered Zagreb on 10 April 1941, Pavlik's closest associate Slavko Kvaternik proclaimed the formation of the Independent State of Croatia, NDH, on a Radio Zagreb broadcast. Meanwhile, Pavlik and several hundred Ustaše volunteers left their camps in Italy and traveled to Zagreb, where Pavlik declared a new government on 16 April 1941. 60. He accorded himself the title of Poglavnik, German, Führer, English, chief leader. The NDH combined most of modern Croatia, all of modern Bosnia and Herzegovina, and parts of modern Serbia into an Italian-German quasi-protectorate. 61. Serbs made up about 30% of the NDH population. 62. The NDH was never fully sovereign, but it was a puppet state that enjoyed the greatest autonomy than any other regime in German-occupied Europe. 59. The Independent State of Croatia was declared to be on Croatian, ethnic and historical territory. 63. This country can only be a Croatian country, and there is no method we would hesitate to use in order to make it truly Croatian and cleanse it of Serbs, who have for centuries endangered us and who will endanger us again if they are given the opportunity. Milovan Djanic, the minister of the NDH government, on 2 May 1941, 64. The Ustaše became obsessed with creating an ethnically pure state. 65. As outlined by Ustaše ministers Mile Budek, Mirko Puk and Milovan Djanic, the strategy to achieve an ethnically pure Croatia was that 66-67. 1/3 of the Serbs were to be killed. 1/3 of the Serbs were to be expelled. 1/3 of the Serbs were to be forcibly converted to Catholicism. According to historian Ivo Goldstein, this formula was never published, but it is undeniable that the Ustaše applied it towards Serbs. 68. The Ustaše movement received limited support from ordinary Croats. 69-70. In May 1941, the Ustaše had about 100,000 members who took the oath. 71-72-73, since Vladko Macic reluctantly called on the supporters of the Croatian Peasant Party to respect and cooperate with the new regime of anti-Pavlik. He was able to use the apparatus of the party and most of the officials from the former Croatian Banovina. 74-75. Initially, Croatian soldiers who had previously served in the Austro-Hungarian army held the highest positions in the NDH armed forces. 76. Historian Irina Ognjanova stated that the similarities between the NDH and the Third Reich included the assumption that terror and genocide were necessary for the preservation of the state. 77. Viktor Gudik made several speeches in early summer 1941, calling Serbs former enemies and unwanted elements to be cleansed and destroyed, and also threatened Croats who did not support their cause. 78. Much of the ideology of the Ustaše was based on Nazi racial theory. Like the Nazis, the Ustaše deemed Jews, Romani, and Slavs to be subhumans Untermensch. They endorsed the claims from German racial theorists that Croats were not Slavs but a Germanic race. Their genocides against Serbs, Jews, and Romani were thus expressions of Nazi racial ideology. 79. Adolf Hitler supported Pavlik in order to punish the Serbs. 80. Historian Michael Feyer explained that the Nazis' decision to kill all of Europe's Jews is estimated by some to have begun in the latter half of 1941, in late June, which, if correct, would mean that the genocide in Croatia began before the Nazi killing of Jews. 81. Jonathan Steinberg stated that the crimes against Serbs in the NDH were the earliest total genocide to be attempted during the World War II. 81. Andrija Artukovic, the Minister of Interior of the Independent State of Croatia, signed into law a number of racial laws. 82. On 30 April 1941, the government adopted the Legal Order of Races and the Legal Order of the Protection of Aryan Blood and the Honor of Croatian People. 82 Croats and about 750. 0 Bosnian Muslims, whose support was needed against the Serbs, were proclaimed Aryans. 20. Donald Bloxham and Robert Jerworth concluded that Serbs were primary target of racial laws and murders. 83. The Ustaše introduced the laws to strip Serbs of their citizenship, livelihoods, and possessions. 48. Similar to Jews in the Third Reich, Serbs were forced to wear armbands bearing the letter P for Pravoslavic Orthodox. 48-19. Likewise, Jews were forced to wear the armband with the letter Zhacek, Fort Židov Jew. 84. Ustaše writers adopted dehumanizing rhetoric. 85-86. In 1941, the usage of the Cyrillic script was banned. 87. And in June 1941 began the elimination of Eastern, Serbian words from Croatian, as well as the shutting down of Serbian schools. 88. Anti-Pavlik ordered, through the Croatian State Office for Language, the creation of new words from old roots and purged many Serbian words. 89. Whereas the Ustaše persecution of Jews and Roma was systematic and represented an implementation of Nazi policies, their persecution of Serbs was rooted in a stronger, homegrown form of hatred, implemented with more variance due to the larger Serb population found across rural areas. This was done despite the fact it would degrade support for the regime, fueled Serb rebellion, and jeopardize the stability of the NDH. 90. The level of violence enacted against Serb communities often depended more on the intercommunal relations and inclinations of the respective local Ustaše warlords than a well-structured policy. 90. Concentration and extermination camps. See also Jasenovac concentration camp and concentration camps in the independent state of Croatia. The SR Bosjek, Serb cutter, an agricultural knife worn over the hand that was used by the Ustaše for the quick slaughter of inmates. The Ustaše set up temporary concentration camps in the spring of 1941 and laid the groundwork for a network of permanent camps in autumn. 6. The creation of concentration camps and extermination campaign of Serbs had been planned by the Ustaše leadership long before 1941. 52. In Ustaše state exhibits in Zagreb, the camps were portrayed as productive and peaceful work camps, with photographs of smiling inmates. 91. Serbs, Jews, and Romani were arrested and sent to concentration camps such as Jasenovac, Stara Gradiška, Gospic, and Jadovno. There were 26 camps in NDH in total. 92. Historian Jos Otamesvich described that the Jadovno concentration camp itself acted as a way station, en route to pits located on Mount Velebit, where inmates were executed and dumped. 93. Approximately 90,000 of the Serb victims of genocide perished in concentration camps. The rest were killed in direct terror, i.e., punitive expeditions and razing of villages, pogroms, massacres, and sporadic executions, which mainly occurred between 1941 and 1942. 90. The largest and most notorious camp was the Jasenovac Stara Gradiška complex. 6. The largest extermination camp in the Balkans. 94. An estimated 100,000 inmates perished there, most Serbs. 95. Vjekoslav Max Luberic, the commander-in-chief of all the Croatian camps, announced the great efficiency of the Jasenovac camp at a ceremony on 9 October 1942, and also boasted, "We have slaughtered here at Jasenovac more people than the Ottoman Empire was able to do during its occupation of Europe." 96. Bodies of the Jasenovac camp prisoners in the Sava River. Bounded by rivers and two barbed wire fences making escape unlikely, the Jasenovac camp was divided into 5 camps. The first 2 closed in December 1941, while the rest were active until the end of the war. Stara Gradiška, Jasenovac V, held women and children. The Siglana Brickyards, Jasenovac III camp, the main killing ground and essentially a death camp, had 88% mortality rate, higher than Auschwitz's 84.6%. 97. A former brickyard, a furnace was engineered into a crematorium, with witness testimony of some, including children, being burnt alive and stench of human flesh spreading in the camp. 98. Luberic had a gas chamber built at Jasenovac V, where a considerable number of inmates were killed during a 3-month experiment with sulfur dioxide and Zyklon B, but this method was abandoned due to poor construction. 99. Still, that method was unnecessary, as most inmates perished from starvation, disease, especially typhus, assaults with mallets, maces, axes, poison, and knives. 99. The SR Bosjek, Serb cutter, was a glove with an attached curved blade designed to cut throats. 99. Large groups of people were regularly executed upon arrival outside camps and thrown into the river. 99. Unlike German-run camps, Jasenovac specialized in brutal one-on-one violence, such as guards attacking barracks with weapons and throwing the bodies in the trenches. 99. Some historians use a sentence from German sources. Even German officers and SS men lost their cool when they saw Ustaše ways and methods. 100. The infamous camp commander Filipovic, dubbed Frasatona, Brother Satan, and the personification of evil, on one occasion drowned Serb women and children by flooding a cellar. 99. Filipovic and other camp commanders, such as Dinko Shakic and his wife Nada Shakic, the sister of Max Luberic, used ingenious torture. 99. There were throat-cutting contests of Serbs, in which prison guards made bets among themselves as to who could slaughter the most inmates. It was reported that guard and former Franciscan priest Petar Bjarzica won a contest on 29 August 1942 after cutting the throats of 1,360 inmates. 101. Inmates were tied and hit over the head with mallets and half-alive hung in groups by the granite ramp crane, their intestines and necks slashed, then dropped into the river. 102. When the partisans and allies closed in at the end of the war, the Ustaše began mass liquidations at Jasenovac, marching women and children to death, and shooting most of the remaining male inmates, then torched buildings and documents before fleeing. 103 Many prisoners were victims of rape, sexual mutilation, and disembowelment, while induced cannibalism amongst the inmates also took place. 104 105 106 107 108 Some survivors testified about drinking blood from the slashed throats of the victims and soap making from human corpses. 109 106 108 110 Monument at the Mirogaj Cemetery in Zagreb, dedicated to the children from Kazara who died in Ustaše concentration camps. Children's concentration camps. See also Children in the Holocaust. The Independent State of Croatia was the only Axis satellite to have erected camps specifically for children. 6. Special camps for children were those at Sisak, Dakovo, and Jastrebarsko, 111, while Stara Gradiška held thousands of children and women. 97 Historian Tomislav Dulic explained that the systematic murder of infants and children, who could not pose a threat to the state, serves as one important illustration of the genocidal character of Ustaše mass killing. 112. The Holocaust and genocide survivors, including Božo Svark, testified that Ustaše tore off the children's hands as well as apply a liquid to children's mouths with brushes, which caused the children to scream and later die. 48 The Sisak camp commander, a physician Anton Nadjer, was dubbed the Croatian Mengele by survivors. 113. Diana Budisavljevic, a humanitarian of Austrian descent, carried out rescue operations and saved more than 15,000 children from Ustaše camps. 114-115. List of concentration and death camps. Jasenovac IV. Around 100,000 inmates perished there, at least 52,000 Serbs. Stara Gradiška Jasenovac V. More than 12,000 inmates lost their lives, mostly Serbs. Gospic, between 24,000 and 42,000 inmates died, predominantly Serbs. Stara Gradiška concentration camp. Jadovno, between 15,000 and 48,000 Serbs and Jews perished there. Slana and Medijna, between 4,000 and 12,000 Serbs, Jews and communists died. Sisak, 6,693 children passed through the camp, mostly Serbs. Between 1,152 and 1,630 died. Danica, around 5,000, mostly Serbs, were transported to the camp. Some of them were executed. Jastrebarsko, 3,336 Serb children passing through the camp. Between 449 and 1,500 died. Kruščica, around 5,000 Jews and Serbs were interned at the camp, while 3,000 lost their lives. Dakovo, 3,800 Jewish and Serb women and children were interned at the camp. At least 569 died. Laber, more than 2,000 Jewish and Serb women and children were interned. At least 200 died. Karastinic, 111 Serbs, Jews and communists were captured. 85 were killed. Sajmish, the camp at the NDH territory operated by the Einsatzgruppen, and since May 1944 by Ustaše. Between 20,000 and 23,000 Serbs, Jews, Roma, and anti-fascists died here. Charvatska Mitrovica, the concentration camp in Sremska Mitrovica, massacres. See also, List of mass executions and massacres in Yugoslavia during World War II. A large number of massacres were committed by the NDH armed forces, Croatian Home Guard, Domobrani, and Ustaše militia. The Ustaše militia was organized in 1941 into 5, later 15, 700-man battalions, 2 railway security battalions, and the elite Black Legion and Poglavnik bodyguard battalion, later brigade. They were predominantly recruited among the uneducated population and working class. Besides ethnic Croats, the militia also contained Muslims where they accounted for an estimated 30% of the membership. 116. Violence against Serbs began in April 1941 and was initially limited in scope, primarily targeting Serb intelligentsia. By July, however, the violence became indiscriminate, widespread, and systematic. Massacres of Serbs were focused in mixed areas with large Serb populations for necessity and efficiency. 117. In the summer of 1941, Ustaše militias and death squads burnt villages and killed thousands of civilian Serbs in the countryside in sadistic ways with various weapons and tools. Men, women, children were hacked to death, thrown alive into pits and down ravines, or set on fire in churches. 78. Hardly ever were firearms used. More commonly, knived axes and such were utilized. Serb victims were dismembered, their ears and tongues cut off and eyes gouged out. 118. Some Serb villages near Srebrenica and Ozren were wholly massacred, while children were found impaled by stakes in villages between Vlasnica and Kladinj. 119. The Ustaše cruelty and sadism shocked even Nazi commanders. 120. A Gestapo report to Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, dated 17 February 1942, stated, "Increased activity of the bands of rebels is chiefly due to atrocities carried out by Ustaše units in Croatia against the Orthodox population. The Ustaše committed their deeds in a bestial manner not only against males of conscript age, but especially against helpless old people, women, and children. The number of the Orthodox that the Croats have massacred and sadistically tortured to death is about 300,000. 121. The Ustaše's preference for cold weapons in carrying out their deeds was partly a result of the shortage of ammunition and firearms in the early course of the war, but also demonstrated the importance the regime placed on the cult of violence and personal slaughter, in particular through the usage of the knife. 122. Charles King emphasized that concentration camps are losing their central place in Holocaust and genocide research because a large proportion of victims perished in mass executions, ravines, and pits. 123. He explained that the actions of the German allies, including the Croatian one, and the town and village-level elimination of minorities also played a significant role. 123. Central Croatia. Bodies of victims of the Gutovac massacre. On 28 April 1941, approximately 196 Serbs from Bjelovar were summarily executed, after arrest orders by K. Vaternik. It was the first act of mass murder committed by the Ustaše upon coming to power, and presaged the wider campaign of genocide against Serbs in the NDH that lasted until the end of the war. A few days following the massacre of Bjelovar Serbs, the Ustaše rounded up 331 Serbs in the village of Otacak. The victims were forced to dig their own graves before being hacked to death with axes. Among the victims was the local Orthodox priest and his son. The former was made to recite prayers for the dying as his son was killed. The priest was then tortured. His hair and beard was pulled out, eyes gouged out before he was skinned alive. 124. On 24-25 July 1941, the Ustaše militia captured the village of Banski Grabovac in the Banija region and murdered the entire Serb population of 1,100 peasants. On 24 July, over 800 Serb civilians were killed in the village of Vlahovic. 117. Between 29 June and 7 July 1941, 280 Serbs were killed and thrown into pits near Kostajnica. 125 large-scale massacres took place in Staro Selo Topusko, including in the village of Peka with 250 victims, 126, and Perna where 427 old men and children were killed. 127. A large number were also killed in Vijishnica 128 and Vjarjinmost. 129. About 60% of Sadilovec residents lost their lives during the war. 130. More than 400 Serbs were killed in their homes, including 185 children. 130. On 17 April 1942, 99 Serbs were burned alive in the village of Kolaric, near Vojnik. 131. A total of 3,849 inhabitants of the town of Vojnik were massacred during the war, out of a total of approximately 5,000 inhabitants. 127. That same month, a total of 759 women, children and elderly Serbs were massacred near the village of Karstinja. 127. On 31 July 1942, in the Saddlevac Church, the Ustaše under Milan Mezic's command massacred more than 580 inhabitants of the surrounding villages, including about 270 children. 132. At various dates, 2019 primarily women and children were killed in the village of Rakovica. 127. Glina. Main article, Glina Massacres. On 11 or 12 May 1941, 300 Serbs were herded into an Orthodox church and shot, after which it was set on fire. The idea for this massacre reportedly came from Mirko Puck, who was the Minister of Justice for the NDH. 133. On 10 May, Ivica Sharik, a specialist for such operations, traveled to the town of Glina to meet with local Ustaše leadership, where they drew up a list of names of all the Serbs between 16 and 60 years of age to be arrested. 134. After much discussion, they decided that all of the arrested should be killed. 135. Many of the town's Serbs heard rumors that something bad was in store for them, but the vast majority did not flee. On the night of 11 May, mass arrests of male Serbs over the age of 16 began. 135. The Ustaše then herded the group into an Orthodox church and demanded that they be given documents proving the Serbs had all converted to Catholicism. Serbs who did not possess conversion certificates were locked inside and massacred. 124. The church was then set on fire, leaving the bodies to burn as Ustaše stood outside to shoot any survivors attempting to escape the flames. 136. A similar massacre of Serbs occurred on 30 July 1941. 700 Serbs were gathered into a church under the premise that they would be converted. Victims were killed by having their throats cut or by having their heads smashed in with rifle butts. Between 500 and 2,000 other Serbs were later massacred in neighboring villages by Vjekoslav Max, Lubaric's forces, continuing until 3 August. In these massacres, specifically males 16 years and older were killed. 137. Only one of the victims, Ljubo Jednak, survived by playing dead. Lika. House of Artist Sava Shumanovic, located Shid, Siamia. Shumanovic was tortured and killed together with 150 other people. The district of Gospic experienced the first large-scale massacres which occurred in the Lika region, as some 3,000 Serb civilians were killed between late July and early August 1941. 117. Ustaše officials reported an emerging Serb rebellion due to massacres. In late July 1941, a detachment of the Croatian military in Gospic noted that the local insurgents were Serb peasants who had fled to the woods, purely as a reaction to the cleansing operations against them by our Ustaše formations. Following a sabotage of railway tracks in the district of Vojnik that was attributed to local communists on 27 July 1941, the Ustaše began a cleansing operation of indiscriminate pillage and killing of civilians, including the elderly and children. 117. On 6 August 1941, the Ustaše killed and burned more than 280 villagers in Mlakva, including 191 children. 138. Between June and August 1941, about 890 Serbs from Ličko, Petrovo Selo and Melanovac were killed and thrown in the so-called Delic pit. 139. During the war, the Ustaše massacred more than 900 Serbs in Divoselo, more than 500 in Smiljan, as well as more than 400 in Široka Kula near Gospic. 140. On 2 August 1941, the Ustaše trapped about 120 children and women and 50 men who tried to escape from Divoselo. After a few days of imprisonment where women were raped, they were stabbed in groups and thrown into the pits. 141. Slavonia. On 21 December 1941, approximately 880 Serbs from Dugo Selo Lasinjsko and Prkos Lasinjski were killed in the Brezj forest. 142. On the Serbian New Year, 14 January 1942, the biggest slaughter of the civilians from Slavonia started. Villages were burned, and about 350 people were deported to Vosin and executed. 143. Siamia. In August 1942, following the joint military anti-partisan operation in the Siamia by the Ustaše and German Wehrmacht, it turned into a massacre by the Ustaše militia that left up to 7,000 Serbs dead. 144 among those killed was the prominent painter Sava Shumanovic, who was arrested along with 150 residents of Shid, and then tortured by having his arms cut off. 145. Bosnian Krajina. In August 1940, one on the Eastern Orthodox Elijah's Holy Day, who is the patron saint of Bosnia and Herzegovina, between 2,800 and 5,500 Serbs from Sanski Most and the surrounding area were killed and thrown into pits which had been dug by victims themselves. 146. During the war, the NDH armed forces killed over 7,000 Serbs in the municipality of Kazarska Dubica, while the municipality lost more than half of its pre-war population. 147. The biggest massacre was committed by the Croatian Home Guard in January 1942, when the village Draksenik was burned and more than 200 were people killed. 148. In February 1942, the Ustaše under Miroslav Filipovic's command massacred 2,300 adults and 550 children in Serb-populated villages Drakulic, Modic, and Shargovac. 149. The children were chosen as the first victims, and their body parts were cut off. 149. Garavis. Main article, Garavis. From July to September 1941, thousands of Serbs were massacred along with some Jews and Roma victims at Garavis, an extermination location near Bihać. On the night of 17 June 1941, Ustaše began the mass killing of previously captured Serbs, who were brought by trucks from the surrounding towns to Garavis. 150. The bodies of the victims were thrown into mass graves. A large amount of blood contaminated the local water supply. 151. Herzegovina. On 9 May 1941, approximately 400 Serbs were rounded up from several villages and executed in a pit behind a school in the village of Blagej. 152. On 31 May, between 120 and 270 Serbs were rounded up near Trebinj and executed. 153. On 2 June 1941, Ustaše authorities led by Herman Tongel in the municipality of Gacko issued an order to the Serb inhabitants of the villages of Korita and Zagrecaj, demanding that all males above the age of 15 report to a building in the village of Stepan. Once there, they were imprisoned for 2 days, and on 4 June, the prisoners, who numbered about 170, were tied together in groups of 2 or 3, loaded onto a lorry, and driven to the Galibnjacha limestone pit near Kabeljaglava, where they were shot, beaten with poles, cudgels, axes, and picks, and thrown into the pit. 154. On June 22, under the ruse that Serbs were planning to launch an offensive prior to the Vidovdan holiday, Tongel enlisted locals to massacre Serb farmers in 4 districts. The victims included women who were raped as well as children. Some were thrown into pits, while others were taken near the Neretva River and executed there. 155. On June 23, 80 people from 3 villages near Gacko were killed. 156. Panjurica pit near Ljubin. On 2 June 1941, the Ustaše killed 140 peasants near the town of Ljubin, and on 23 June killed an additional 160. In the municipality of Stalac, Nearly 260 were killed during the course of 2 days, 156. In the Livno field area, the Ustaše killed over 1,200 Serbs including 370 children, 157. In the Koprivnica forest near Livno, around 300 citizens were tortured and killed. 157 About 300 children, women and the elderly were killed and thrown into the Ravni Dalak pit in Donji Rujani. 158. From 4-6 August 1941, 650 women and children killed by being thrown into the Golubinka pit near Shermansai. 48 159. Also, hand grenades were thrown at dead bodies. 159. Some 4,000 Serbs were later massacred in neighboring places during that summer. 48. Drina Valley. Some 7,200 Serbs massacred by Muslim Ustaše forces in Rashika Gaj, Vlasnica in Bosnia and Herzegovina between 22 June and 20 July 1941, after raping women and girls. 160. Many Serbs were executed by Ustaše along the Drina Valley for a month, especially near Visegrad. 48. Đuro Francetic's Black Legion killed thousands of defenseless Bosnian Serb civilians and threw their bodies into the Drina River. 161. In 1942, about 6,000 Serbs were killed in Stari Brod near Rigatica and Milešvica. 160-163. Sarajevo. During the summer of 1941, Ustaše militia periodically interned and executed groups of Sarajevo Serbs. 164. In August 1941, they arrested about 100 Serbs suspected of ties to the resistance armies, mostly church officials and members of the intelligentsia, and executed them or deported them to concentration camps. 164. The Ustaše killed at least 323 people in the Villa Luberic, a slaughterhouse and place for torturing and imprisoning Serbs, Jews, and political dissidents. 165. Expulsion and ethnic cleansing. Expulsions was one of the pillars of the Ustaše plan to create a pure Croat state. 48. The first to be forced to leave were war veterans from World War I Macedonian front who lived in Slavonia and Siemia. 48 166. By mid-1941, 5,000 Serbs had been expelled to German-occupied Serbia. 48. The general plan was to have prominent people deported first, so their property could be nationalized and the remaining Serbs could then be more easily manipulated. By the end of September 1941, about half of the Serbian Orthodox clergy, 335 priests, had been expelled. 167. The Drina is the border between the East and West. God's providence placed us to defend our border, which our allies are well aware and value, because for centuries we have proven that we are good frontiersmen. 48. Mile Budak, the minister of the NDH government, August 1941, advocates of expulsion presented it as a necessary measure for the creation of a socially functional nation-state, and also rationalized these plans by comparing it with the 1923 population exchange between Greece and Turkey. 168. The Ustaše set up holding camps, with the aim of gathering a large number of people and deporting them. 48. The NDH government also formed the Office of Colonization to resettle Croats on reclaimed land. 48. During the summer of 1941, the expulsions were carried out with the significant participation of the local population. 169. Many representatives of local elites, including Bosnian Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Germans in Slavonia and Siemia, played an active role in the expulsion. 170. An estimated 120,000 Serbs were deported from the NDH to German-occupied Serbia, and 300,000 fled by 1943. 2. By the end of July 1941, according to the German authorities in Serbia, 180,000 Serbs defected from the NDH to Serbia, and by the end of September that number exceeded 200,000. In that same period, 14,733 persons were legally relocated from the NDH to Serbia. 166 in turn. The NDH had to accept more than 200,000 Slovenian refugees who were forcefully evicted from their homes as part of the German plan of annexing parts of the Slovenian territories. In October 1941, organized migration was stopped because the German authorities in Serbia forbid further immigration of Serbs. According to documentation of the Commissariat for Refugees and Immigrants in Belgrade, in 1942 and 1943, illegal departures of individuals from NDH to Serbia still existed, numbering an estimated 200,000, though these figures are incomplete.